Hey everybody, welcome back to the Audiomo Podcast, episode number 13. I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Dave Nelson. How are you doing tonight, Dave?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm just fried, man. I'm really tired. Life has really been kicking me in the ass. And the holidays are that time of year where, even more so than other times, you don't really get let off. However, I did get a new guitar, and it was the D'Angelico. I'm really excited about it. But before we get into that, I want to talk about a general topic, and I'll tie it back into the D'Angelico afterwards. We all have our preferences when it comes to what we like in guitars, the sounds we like, and the feel. But what's one thing, or if you have more than one, that's cool too, that you consider a deal breaker with the guitar? And when I say that, I mean something that you can't just change on it, whether it's the heaviness, the scale length, maybe a body shape, or the thickness of the neck. Is there anything like that for you?
You know, you mentioned this, and I've been trying to think about it, and I really think, you know, the only thing that comes to mind is weight at this point. It's the only thing it's the only thing I've ever actually gotten rid of a guitar for that was otherwise serviceable. You know, I don't think I've ever played anything with a scale length that's really bothered me. I'm usually pretty good about adjusting to stuff like that pretty quickly, and it's not even that the weight is like so bothersome. It's just like, you know, I have a number of open spots on my rack basically, and if I have a guitar that I'm not constantly picking up, I'm like, this one's going away. And because a guitar's too heavy is really the only reason I don't pick one up. I have other guitars that I don't pick up as often because, you know, they're just not as versatile, but yeah, I really think it's only weight. You know, everything else I feel like I can change, right? I mean, I aside from maybe a guitar that's like unintonatable, you know, like, but it's been a long time since I've run into a guitar that I couldn't fix. I don't know. Yeah. How about you?
That's interesting you say that, but before we get to me, I just want to get specific here and hit you on this. Where is your cutoff for weight? Like, what is your average guitar weigh, do you think?
I mean, my average is probably I think around like 8, right? Maybe 8-ish, I think. I have the Ibanez Tallman that I have is kind of on the heavier side, and it's almost on the line. And I don't know what the actual weight is, but the only one that I had so far that I got rid of for weight was there was a Benton Les Paul that I had, and it just is too much. So I pawned it off on somebody else because it's just been sitting there and I never pick it up. But yeah, I don't know. I don't weigh. I know you always weigh the guitars when they come in, especially for the channel. So I don't have a number. But yeah, I think really anything in the standard Les Paul weight is probably just too much for me.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so for me, the weight is an issue, but only when it's really heavy. And when I went to Guitar Center, I did say that I purchased a set of pickups, which is the main reason I went there to begin with here, and I ended up going with the D'Angelico on top of that. Well, that was for the Orville, and I was thinking to myself, you know, I don't really need to unload this guitar. Like, I don't need to sell it, and it is such a uncommon guitar. It's not rare, but it's very uncommon in America to get one like that, especially without a headstock break. And I'm sitting and I'm playing it, and I could manage it. It's 9.5 pounds, but I don't love it. Like, just it's not something that I can get past like long term. You know what I mean? And it's not like I'm playing in a rock band anymore where I need to be standing up on stage with a Les Paul. So this would be mainly used for the sit down and for any sort of tracking, whether it's for the YouTube channel or just any session work I'm doing. I would be using the Les Paul primarily for that, or just having fun with. I just said, you know what, I can't do it. So those pickups are not getting installed. And to me, this is going to be where the D'Angelico thing is. What's even more important is the thickness of the neck. Now, I think I have a very decent understanding of why this might not bother you, actually. And I think it has to do with how we both approach guitar and the kind of guitar we play. I play a lot with my thumb over and on the E string. And I don't play in drop tuning, so my thumb does a lot of the work. And when I'm playing a neck that's really thin, because my wrist is so screwed up, as I was explaining to you earlier, I could put a shot in this cyst that's on my wrist and drink out of it. My wrist is in bad shape. Whenever I'm playing a really skinny neck and I try to play thumb over on it, it cramps up and it's like I can't play guitar like the rest of that day, period. Like, I gotta stop. There's nothing I can do about it. So I mean, the long-term thing is here. I mean, it's unfortunate because I've sold guitars I've loved because of that, because it physically hurts to play them. The CE24, I sold that guitar. That was a gorgeous guitar. It sounded great. It did everything, but I couldn't deal with the pattern thin neck. And this D'Angelico, I think it's going to have the same fate to it. I tried playing it for a little bit today, and on the cowboy chord area, not so bad. But once you get up to like the ninth fret and the thumb over, I was starting to feel the cramping, and I was like, I'm done. Like, that is what it is. So yeah, I would say the weight is a little bit more manageable for me if I'm not playing with it live. But like the absolute deal breaker is the neck. The neck's got to be right for me.
Yeah, so just to touch on the weight thing again, I really think that the guitar has to occupy a space that nothing else that I have occupies for me to deal with the weight. Because even as we're talking about this, the weight is kind of tentative, like you said. Like, it's, so there are areas where I'm like, I can deal with it. And the Harley Benton Les Paul that I had P90s in it, and I have another Harley Benton, the double cut, that has P90s in it. So it's like when I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the two, I'm always going to go for the double cut because it's more comfortable to play and it's got the P90, right? Whereas, like, if I didn't have another guitar with P90s and I just really wanted that sound, I'd probably be okay with dealing with the weight. That being said, on the neck side, that particular Les Paul had a baseball back of a neck, right? And you were saying, like, try to think of the things, and I'm like, immediately my mind goes to neck as the thing that you can't change, that I would be a deal breaker. But I've had guitars with completely different necks, and I don't think it's ever really bothered me. And again, I think it has a lot to do with what you're talking about, right? Like, I don't really play with my thumb over. I've been just as comfortable on like wizard necks as I have been on baseball bat style chunky necks. It's sort of like, it takes me a few minutes to kind of get my head around it and kind of know what I'm doing with it. But like, I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. It's never really bothered me. I've had guitar players that I've played with who are like super specific about their strings and all this kind of stuff and types of picks they're using and all that. And like, I don't know, I can pick up any guitar with any, aside from like eights, because you're just bending like crazy. Maybe I'm just like, just overly, feature agnostic. If that's a thing, it just is never really, I don't know. It just takes a few minutes to adjust and then you figure it out. But I can totally see why it would be an issue for you. And especially if you've got wrist issues, it's like, anything that's going to be in your way should be a deal breaker, right? Like, we have limited time at this point in our lives. And if you're fighting a guitar, get rid of the guitar,
Yeah, I think the only fight that I somewhat accept is with my Gibson, the 339. It's a Gibson, so it doesn't exactly stay in tune nearly as well as a Telecaster or even the Jaguar. Dude, I abused the living hell out of that tremolo system on that Jag. It never fails. It's rock solid, and I love that. I could deal with that. That's not something that I'm like, because it doesn't like physically bother me. But yeah, the neck, it can't be too thin at this point. It's one of those things. However, I did buy another Les Paul, so we should have that next week, and I'm really excited about it. It's one that, a few people were asking me about doing a new model. I didn't buy this one used, but it'll make sense. It kind of goes against my rules of buying a new Les Paul because you never know what you're getting, but the place I bought it from is like, if you're going to buy a new one, you buy it from here. Yep. So, anyways, yeah, but wrap up with the D'Angelico and this topic real quick. I'm really impressed, but I'm really confused by that brand. And when I say that, I was like, oh, this is their entry-level stuff. Like, this is pretty good. I wonder what their American stuff is like. Oh, little did I know. Their $2,000 guitars are not American, nor are they Japanese. They're Korean.
Maybe that's why they have the sales on them so often.
It could be part of it. I'm not sure.
Not really $2,000 guitars, I'm not sure. I don't know if you follow the stupid deal of the day on Musician's Friend, but they are very consistently way marked down. And it's just for some reason that brand in particular, and maybe that's part of the reason.
Well, the ones that get marked down the most are the Indonesian and the Chinese ones. The higher end ones, like their top of the line ones, the ones that I was just talking about, those are Korean. Those don't get really knocked down that much. The ones that you see for like $550, like their 335 copy and stuff like that, I think that's a Chinese guitar. So I kind of understand it with that. And I think that's any brand at this point. Once you start, unless you're Fender, because people are going to spend $450 for a classic vibe Fender. It doesn't need to go on sale at this point. They're going to buy it, and that just is what it is. They've kind of really nailed their audience, and they have a really big following, those classic vibes. People tell me to keep trying those, and they keep forgetting that pink Jaguar behind me started its life as a pure classic vibe, and all it took was a new neck, all new electronics, all new tremolo, all new bridge, and all new wiring for it to be a guitar that I was like, I like this now, but still nowhere near as much as the custom shop.
The Ship of Theseus guitar, huh?
Yeah. But speaking of guitars, I got well, not me. My wife got a free guitar. I didn't tell anybody this. It was a bass. So at the bar that she works at, we're doing our first date of our residency on the 14th there. Somebody that often plays is one of those older guys who, he kind of does everything from like singing, harmonica, guitar, bass. He's one of those. And he's like, do you have a backup bass? And she's like, no. And he's like, do you want one? She's like, you mean to give it to me? And he's like, yeah, just take it. She said, yeah, she doesn't know anything about brands other than Fender when it comes to bass. And she's like, it's red. And I'm like, do you remember what letter it starts with? No, it's a really red bass, but I could tell it's cheap. I'm like, how can you tell? And she's like, I could tell. And I'm like, all right. So she brings it home. What kind of bass is it?
I mean, for the funniness of this story, I'm going to say it's a Music Man.
No. I thought you were going to get this perfect. For the funniness of the story, it was a Dean.
Ooh. That's a weird bass to give away. I mean, is it a Dean starter, or is it like a...
Dude, I don't...
Is it like a...
It's like, it's got one pickup in it. It's gigantic. It's in the middle of the body. It's like super 1980s candy apple red chipped out. I mean, it plays. It's not terrible, but I got a kick out of it. And I only bring up that story so we could lead into Dean guitars. Now, I have a history with this brand, so I'm a little bit, jaded and a little bit biased. However, they're being sued by Dimebag Darrell's estate for doing some sketchy stuff and basically abusing his name for sales is the long and short of it. I'll leave a link to the article down below. I linked it to you as well, Dave. Did you get a chance to read it?
I did. And, I'm mixed on this one. I feel like it's one of those ones everybody who is in this kind of genre area, knows about this and is like, you give an opinion about what you think on Dean guitars at some point in your life, right? But I don't know. It's weird to me to be like, I feel like the entirety of the deal is that they've been abusing his name and the copyright for years, right? So like, why is it after, all of these years of doing it with them, are they suddenly having an issue, right? And that's where it just sort of feels like it's a power grab of some kind or a money grab of some kind or whatever. And I'm pretty sure they're off with another company now, right? Like doing dime guitars with a different company. I'm pretty sure I saw that. Yeah. But like, I don't know, to give Dean a bunch of shit about doing this after you did it with them for this long, just, I don't know. It feels like there's something else going on. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, let's start with your possibly unbiased thoughts.
I've been to that factory a few times, and the reason I was at that factory, I made a video about this. I'll link it up here in case any of you are really bored. You want to watch me talk about this in detail. I'll give you the too long don't read. And I think it was 2011. There was a contest Dean Guitars had to design a guitar. And if you won the contest to design it, your guitar got put into production. And it was like a whole big thing. It wasn't just like you made a sketch or anything like that. You had to actually source all your parts.
I do remember this now.
Oh yeah. So we win, okay? Right? They bring us over to the factory. The first thing I noticed, and this is going to tie it back to Dimebag, it's all Dimebag Darrell as soon as you walk in. That company has no identity. They have no identity. Their identity is Dimebag Darrell. And it's whatever, but you could tell the way that things worked internally. We worked with a guy named Curse, who's no longer with the company, which is a common trend with that specific brand. A lot of people in the higher up positions kind of come and go. And that guitar never got put into production. And that's not what bothers me, because that stuff happens. I understand that. There was no communication for like 3 or 4 years from any of it. And then all of a sudden I get a message, and there were supposed to be royalties. There was supposed to be all this other stuff that was signed, like contracts. And they just totally screwed us. They totally took advantage of us. They destroyed our design. And yeah, just the fact that they went through all that trouble of doing it and then didn't follow through, and then didn't even like, it's like your flaky stoner friend. He's just like, you forget about it. You're like, oh, whatever. You're like, I learned my lesson. I'm never dealing with you ever again. So that being said, I personally don't like Dean guitars, and I don't think I would ever have seen myself with a Dean guitar had it not been my wife getting one for free to come home with. But I'm kind of in the same camp with you. First of all, there's 2 things against Dean. I hope they win their lawsuit against Gibson. That one I think is bullshit, because every single person has done that. And one thing you have to give Fender a lot of credit for, they saw how many people make Strats, dude. How many people make Strats or Strat copies?
Yeah, every company has a Strat copy.
Exactly.
Right?
So the fact that Fender has never taken this approach, and they're just as big, if not bigger, than Gibson is, I think it says a lot about the overall character of them. I have to give them the tip of the cap here. But Gibson, I don't feel deserve this. So in that lawsuit, I hope that, Dean is allowed to keep doing what they're doing, because it's definitely different enough. And then when it comes to the Dimebag Darrell stuff, I also see your point. Why now? But I also remember, like I said, a lot of people change positions at Dean Guitars. Maybe they had somebody they really liked that was there, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore. Their new representative doesn't treat them right, treats them like shit. We don't know that side of the story. And based on my experiences with them and knowing how they kind of, not had the best track record with employees, really long hauling it out outside of the exception of a few, that is where, if I had to just put a blatant speculation guess on it, that's what I would think happened.
Yeah, I think, I wonder too if maybe they're finally hitting kind of the crossover point where, like, we're now too far past Pantera to even really, have kind of the selling power that it had. Obviously there's diehard Pantera fans and they buy everything Dimebag, and that's cool, right? I like Pantera. I like Dimebag quite a bit. Not enough to buy one of his guitars, but I get that there's that solid hardcore fan base for it. But like, we're way out from Pantera, heyday. We're also way out from the kind of like, underground scene of a guy who's shredding that's selling guitars too, in that way, right? So like, I wonder if, maybe we get to a point where they're just not selling that good, and they're saying to them like, hey, what do we need to do to pick this up, right? Like, the checks that are coming in aren't as big as they used to be, and Dean doesn't have a good answer for him, and then they're like, hey, we can go do this somewhere else. I don't know. It just is. I can't even think of a single other person that has a product like this. Like, obviously there are tons of, dead celebrities that sell signature things or whatever, but I can't think of anybody who's like, this is not the best word for it, but as egregious as Dean is about it, right? Like, obviously Fender puts out a Kurt Cobain signature like every once in a while, and that's fine. It feels okay, but like, they don't do it constantly. It's not like their only thing. When you think Dean, you think Dimebag, but it's like, the guy only had a couple of guitars. Like, they've put out 1 million Dimebag guitars that he never had anything to do with. Like, I don't know. There is literally no other version of this. I don't know.
No, I'm with you, because there's no other company that you associate only with a guitar player. I can't think of one. And that is Dean Guitars. When you think of Dean Guitars, you think of Dimebag Darrell. When you think of Fender, you could think of a multitude of different people. I don't even need to list them. Even when you think of Gibson, it's the same thing. There's so many people that play these guitars that they don't need to hang their hat on one person. Whereas with Dean, they got lucky, and then unfortunately he passed. Well, fortunately for them, because I don't know how much of this they'd be able to get away with, or if he would have left on his own at some point.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
They
had Kerry King too for a while. He just left a little while ago too. I don't know, it's kind of telling. I guess it must be something with management. The other thing is too, I don't feel like they've ever been able to capitalize on the guys that they've had with them that are, alive in the way that they've been able to capitalize on Dime, which is like, just weird, right? Like I don't. Slayer's fucking huge, arguably much bigger than Pantera ever was. Like, why are they not selling Kerry King guitars out the ass? You know, I don't know.
Maybe it's because he is alive, and this is going to sound dark, but it's a lot easier to have full control when you have your second partner party. In this essence, you know, Dimebag Darrell isn't there to give his 2 cents.
Yeah. I don't know. This is again pure speculation in hearsay, but I don't know. Like we said, bad taste out of the mouth right away when you're going. We've spent a decade or more now at this point, you know, selling Dimebag guitars after he's passed, and now suddenly we have an issue with it from an ethical standpoint. I mean, some weird shit's definitely going on.
I don't know. I think it's... I still stand by my kind of assessment here, but we'll never know. And if we do know, it won't be until sometime into the future. However, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. We don't need to kind of hash this out because anything else we say is, like I said, pure speculation and pure us just kind of just shooting the shit as friends. And I think we both made, you know, our opinions and our thoughts on it pretty clear. Dave, you had something you wanted to talk about. You're going to get there.
Yeah. Well, I have two things, right? So you said something during that last piece that was interesting that I want to touch on. So you were talking about how Fender doesn't do what Gibson does, and they don't go after anybody for using the Strat or the Tele body, right? Everybody does it. But I would argue that I think it's a calculated decision rather than them just not being assholes, right? Like everybody obviously ripped into Gibson when they started doing it with like the whole play authentic bullshit, and they went and sued everybody, right, about using Les Paul. But what I think to me seems so interesting about that is that you look at a Gibson and you say, this is a Les Paul. It's a classic guitar, but for me and you, if there's another brand that builds a Les Paul better, I will happily play that Les Paul. And Fender, at the end of the day, they go, everybody can go build their Strat or whatever, but we know that when you want a Strat, you're going to come to Fender and buy one, right? Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think the two brands with the two arguably most iconic guitars can be approached in such a different way, right? Fender gets away with it because they know that it's almost free advertising for them. You can go, hey, you know, this brand has a Super Strat, but you're still saying Super Strat. You're not saying whatever their version of it is or whatever. They know at the end of the day, their brand is king. If I go, you know, to ESP and I buy an ESP Les Paul, it's just an ESP, you know, EC whatever, right? Like, why is one different than the other?
Okay, I think I can answer this partially. Let me ask it a question first. When was the last time, or is there ever a time you can think of where Fender released a guitar and made a big launch around it, and it was a colossal flop as far as like they tried to do something absolutely wild, innovative, or anything like that? They really, really went for it and it failed. Can you think of that time? Yeah, can you think of one?
I can't think of big ones. I can think of slightly underwhelming launches, but never a flop.
Okay, can you name any Gibsons?
Yeah, probably.
Well, you have Mini Tune. First of all, you had the initial line of the Robot Run to begin with. That was the first one. The first Robot tuners, those guitars were, you couldn't give those away for $600 a few years ago. But now that the great guitar boom has happened, even those have gone up in value. Then you had your mini tuners. Then they started messing with the asymmetrical necks. Then you had the brass nuts, the disastrous year of 2015, where they got every single thing wrong. Hologram Les Paul stickers on it. The logo's all wrong. It's just, they've done so much, and then they just keep carving up different pieces of the wood to try and make them lighter, and they're losing a lot of the essence to it. Whereas with Fender has never had that gigantic mistake. Fender's also never come out, like you said, and been like, if you're not playing a Fender, you're not playing a Strat. You know, they've never been assholes, and I do think it is calculated risk. However, it is still good business not to do that. And I think the other thing is, if you look at it just from a straight design point, because it's a bolt-on, and because there's so much that you can change, and it's still going to like maintain like the design to an extent, it's easier to make these little alterations on a Telecaster and have it not be like the end of the world. Like, for example, say you bought a guitar that has the normal 4-bolt neck plate on it, but you didn't like the neck. Say you got one with a really modern neck on it, but you love the body and you love the pickups, or vice versa. Maybe you love the neck and you hate maybe the Sumerian Cobalt, the newest version of the noiseless pickups. It is so easy for you to change that one thing, and it can drastically change your experience with that guitar, and it won't cost you a ton. The Gibsons are set together, man. Like, that is what it is. You can change the tuners and the electronics. Outside of that, have fun. Good luck. Like, they are what they are. And the other problem is, I think they're a victim of their own lightning in a bottle, because they got the Les Paul so right in the 50s and 60s. Where do you go from there? The only way to go is to take big risks, and none of those big risks have worked. And the only time that Gibson recently have been starting to get a little bit of credit back is because these new standard 50s and standard 60s went back to that way. These are non-weight relieved. There's no coil splitting. There's no PCB board. It's just straight up like, this is a Les Paul. And for people that really want like a Gibson, this is the first time in a long time outside of the historic and the custom shop line, you're able to get it. Whereas with Fender, you've never had that problem. You can get a Strat with a flat radius. You can get a Strat with a modern 9.5. You could always find the classic 7.25. Those are not hard either. So I think that might be a part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other piece of it for me, and we cannot go a single episode without it turning into a Gibson bashing party, is that I feel like Fender has figured out what is their core brand in a way that Gibson has never done, right? Like, or not so much their core brand, but Fender went, this is what makes a perfect Strat, this is what makes a perfect Tele, and then over multiple years have just released that, right? Where it's like, we've talked about this ad nauseum at this point. Like, there's a couple of things that Gibson could do to just make a great Les Paul. Reasonable price, reasonable weight, reasonable features, done. And they just refuse to do it for whatever reason. And I think that's why, for me at least, that I'm always willing to play someone else's Les Paul before a Gibson first. Whereas I know if I really wanted a Tele, the only real Tele that I'm going to get would be a Fender, you know? And I don't know. It's such an interesting brand study, and I think it's such a smart thing for Fender to do, to just be like, we're going to let everybody copy us, but no one's going to do it the way that we do it. So every time they copy us, they're just putting our name further out there, right? Like, whereas Gibson went like, oh shit, we can't just have people copying our stuff. Like, why couldn't they see it that way, right? Why didn't they just go, hey, every time somebody recreates a Les Paul, they're saying like, we love what you do so much, we want to do it too, and embrace it, you know? And I don't know.
I always get a kick out of this because one way or another, doesn't matter. We could be talking about cars, man. You will find a way to make it known how much you hate Gibson. And it's funny to me. And I just, like I said, I just bought a new Gibson. So I can take it. I'm a big boy. But I find it funny, but I also find a lot of it valid. So let's let the horse die.
We'll stop
it
there. I did have one other, and actually it was interesting that you were talking about the 339 earlier and your tuning stability issues. I have been tracking guitars all week for the new record, and I recently have just run into this issue where it's like, I don't know if it's my ears or if it's my current set of guitars. Like, I am finding myself like frantically tuning constantly, right? Like, and always like hearing little issues and going like, ah, shit, and going back, you know. And it's like, as somebody who records in the studio a lot, you know, your workflow when you're recording guitars is basically do a take, tune, do a take, tune, do a take, tune, right? But I don't know what it is about this. Maybe it's the time of year and weather changes and stuff. But it has been frantic tuning. But I'm curious. I have a pretty specific sort of recording setup. And we can come back to mine, but I'm curious, when you're like recording for real, you know, what's your setup look like? What do you know, what's your DAW situation look like? Or are you always just letting somebody else run it and not worrying about it?
Okay, my setup is super easy. I use 2 microphones and I use an AB box. I go right into the AB box. I send out a DI right into the recording interface. And then I mic with a 57 edge of the cone. Love it there. It's my sweet spot. And then a condenser. As long as they're in phase together, that's all I need to do. Levels are checked. I'm done. That's it. That's literally my recording process. And in Pro Tools, like I said, I have the 2 tracks together. and then the one DI track muted, so obviously I don't hear it. But if there was any sort of problems in the recording process, say, the dog decides he wants to be an asshole and start going ballistic in the middle of a take, or my kid throws another temper tantrum because she's a toddler and that's what they do, I mean, I'm not losing the take at that point. But yeah, no, I'm really straightforward and to the point. And for many years, I tried more complicated things. And I don't know, I find that for me, when I'm actually working, I don't want more variables than necessary. The 2 microphones, I love the 2 microphones I have. They do what I need them to do. And then just as a backup, always have it going in direct signal.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so recently we've kind of streamlined, and I have in Pro Tools already basically a folder with all of what I deem as kind of my necessary tracks, right? So I've got 2 left rights, so 4 total tracks for cleans, and then I usually have 6 total tracks for distortion, heavy stuff, and then I have usually 2 to 4, depending on the track, dub guitar lines, like overlay stuff, right? And so I'll have a DI and a live amp, which is usually like the Helix or one of the amps just hooked up as kind of the monitoring situation, right? And so I'm recording DI and the monitor at the same time. And then I have a separate track set off so that there's always one DI running with a tuner on it that's just up on the screen constantly. So I never have to think about it, and I can just tune in between every take. Yeah, everything's grouped left, right, already going, so I can literally just move as fast as possible because it's usually just me by myself. And then I worry about all of the tones after. I'm like a super stickler about not caring about tone at all while I'm playing. I'm like in the ballpark, so I get the feel, but like I don't want to think about it. I just want to I want to focus on how I'm playing and what I'm playing only. And I let the DI take care of that, and then I reamp later, and that usually goes through my huge giant pedal board before we get to an amp, and then back through an IR. But I think that in the digital world that's probably a fairly common setup, but I just didn't I never really hear anybody talk about like what the actual sort of DAW thing looks like when you're sitting down to do a song.
It's funny, you brought up a trick I used to do when I had that green Les Paul piece. I used to have the tuner up as big as the screen would allow it. And I would find myself almost distracted by it because I would hear those little things in my head. I was like, was that right? Was that wrong? And then I'd start staring at the screen to be like checking it as I'm playing. And it would kind of interfere with my tracks. And there was nothing wrong with that guitar, but I think it was one of those things that you're kind of going through right now where maybe you're just too far in your own head and you're thinking something's off. Where personally, as long as you're like not egregiously out of tune or like so, if you're not playing open chords where it's really bad, like through the majority, I don't mind if something is slightly sharp or slightly flat, like on one string anymore. I kind of think it adds like character to it. But going back to the other point that you made, you don't care about the tone until after. I will not record until the tone is what I want it to be. I won't do it. But I think part of that also is the fact that 90% of what I do is clean. So I want that. Like, I don't like the digital cleans at all compared to that. The only digital clean that I would honestly say I would track with and would have been pretty happy with was the Captain 50 on the Quad Cortex. But outside of that, I'm such a tone stickler for that part. And when I do overdriven guitars, I always do that separately. So like I have no problem just punching it in and then just doing crossfades to make sure everything kind of sits nicely so it's not awkward. But yeah, that's really funny you mentioned the tuning trick. I haven't done that in like years, but I did the same thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I don't know how much we've really talked about this on the podcast, but we had a lead guitar player in the band and he left, and we had to kind of rework all of the songs to work as a trio, right? So a lot of filling up this sonic space kind of fell on my shoulders now, where I didn't necessarily have to do it before, right? So I'd play a series of chords and he'd take a top end thing and then you'd kind of fill the whole spectrum, right? Now suddenly his thing's gone. I still got to fill up that space, right? So a lot of my chord playing became these giant, big, open chords with tons of like open notes ringing out and things like that, where when it is out of tune, it's super apparent because it's just sitting there, And then I'm an idiot and I have this one track that we did It's in drop C. And it's not a heavy track at all. Actually, it's 90% clean. And drop C, and none of my guitars are set up properly for it. In clean it was such a bitch. I've recorded this song probably 7 times over at this point, because I always go like, no, I got it. And then I go listen back and I'm like, it doesn't sound right. And so I've gotten neurotic now about the tuning because it's been such an issue, but we finally got it. I did it with the Tallman. I actually went and got it set up for C and put the correct strings on it and everything. I had somebody else set it up so that I could be like, no, a professional did it. I know it's right. Mostly to just get out of my own head about it. But because yes, I have done that too, where like I am sitting there obsessing about the tuning to the point where I'm hearing things, and then I'll go send it to somebody else and they're like, nah, you're insane. There's nothing wrong. It's perfect, And so there's definitely a psychological thing to it that way. But yeah, at this point, it's like, we talk about this all the time, right? I cannot waste time. I don't have time to waste anymore. So it's just about making sure that, for me, the tuner is up in giant, so that way I don't, like, I used to have the snark on, and even that, stopping, turning on the snark and doing it and turning it off, like, and then I'm like, oh, I'll just leave it on, and then the batteries die super fast, and then it's like, nope, I just want a DI track constantly on. It's never tied to what I'm doing. It's just on and in the background and not doing anything, so that the tuner can just be up and in my face, and I can tune between every take.
That makes sense. And your workflow makes a lot of, coherent sense to me as far as the style of music that you do and the amount of layering that you do. I totally understand it. It's just like you said, it's not something that people talk about often. We always talk about, not just us, but when people talk about guitars, it's like, oh, well, what amp are you using, or what guitar, or what distortion pedal? And yeah, that stuff is somewhat important, and it's the baseline for your tone. But if you're somebody like you, where you're going to be redoing it after the fact anyways, there's a lot more that goes into it. And it's a lot to be considered. And most people don't even do the basics that I do. A lot of people just use a 57, hope and pray. And then if anything happens to the track, or they want to do any sort of alteration, have fun retracking it. And I just hope that it's something that you can nail. That's all. And just protect yourselves.
And I think the other thing that, I don't know that I've really heard a lot about too is for me, like, anything modern and heavy, like, I'm editing the guitars, and editing a DI is a million times easier than editing like a recorded guitar track. So for me, like, I'm getting it in there, I'm laying it down, and then I'm editing the DIs, and then I'm reamping, and like that way it's perfect, and I know it's perfect, and I can sit there and obsess about the tone and not worry about the take, because I know the take is absolutely perfect. But yeah, we've done the bare bones thing, and there is something to that for sure. There have been like some great recordings that we've got because we didn't give a shit, and we were just going like, this sounds great right now, and let's lay it down. And there's a certain kind of magic to that I think, probably my sterile process loses a little bit. But that being said, there's a lot of things that we go like, I really wish I could change that now that I, couldn't get those times too. So there's definitely a balance, and I think at this point, like, we've got down what we do enough that I know I'm not losing what I need to lose by doing it this way, and I'm just capturing all the data that I need, really. But, there still is something to be said for throwing an amp in a room, and if I didn't have a baby next door, maybe I would do that more often, but, it's just... these are the situations that I think work for us best.
I can't say enough. My main amp that I use for my cleans is 122 watts. So when I want to record, in order to get any sort of juice, pretty much the whole neighborhood's going to hear it. So it's not something that is reasonable to be doing all the time.
You ever thought about an ISO box?
Dave, I could put an ISO box inside of an ISO box, inside of an ISO box, inside of an ISO box, inside of the Ghostbusters thing that they trap the ghosts in. It wouldn't fucking matter. It would not matter. It is just that loud.
I'm sure that it is too loud for it, but if you could get an extra 10% of juice out of it because it was in an ISO box, I would be curious whether it would be worth it. I've always thought about building one, but I don't have enough. I think I really only have the 2 cabs, and I don't use them often enough that I feel like it would be worth it to build one or buy one or whatever. But I think it'd be super interesting to... What I really wanted to do is build one of the boxes that you could just pop a speaker into and just use it as like a, as just like, okay, I'm going to do it with this speaker, and then I'll pop a new speaker and do it with that speaker and layer and do that kind of thing, and basically create your own like live IR sort of a thing. I think it'd be super interesting. I've never really gotten around to looking into what it would take to build one, although I don't really think that
I don't
much.
imagine it would be that hard. That'd be a fun little project for you.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe, when I have some free time.
I can laugh at that too, because there's no such thing as that. Not for people like us. This is our free time. So, all right. Now, last week on the podcast, we mentioned that we were going to be doing our album reviews in a new way. What we decided to do was we went to Bandcamp. We looked up a city. Now, you can't just type in any city, and I found this out the hard way. And we picked an album that was released recently from that city in a genre we thought we might like, and we went in totally blind. So, Dave, who'd you pick? What'd you listen to, and what did you think?
Well, first off, I just want to say, if anybody from Bandcamp ever listens to this, this was very difficult. More difficult than I think it needs to be. Really, it's this should be a whole separate episode. For my day job, I'm a designer, right? I'm a UX designer. I design interactions for web and applications, right? And I feel like there is this wide gap in just think about all the data that Spotify has, and then think about the data that they allow you to access as a user, right? Like you could filter down to the minutia if you really wanted to with the data that they have. I could tell you that I want a band from wherever that released music at this time that this many people listen to, who also listen to whatever, and that data would be like nothing for them to serve you. But they don't do it that way. They just kind of go like, check out a playlist, right? Bandcamp's kind of doing the same thing, where they're sort of like, they're giving you like really broad strokes, but it would be really cool to have some finer strokes. And one of these days, again, when I have more free time, I'm going to create a new streaming service that fixes some of these problems, and then I'll be a billionaire, and whatever, and, it'll be great. Anyway, point is, I went to Detroit. I lived in Detroit for a little while, and I went to Detroit as the city. I think we talked about it last time, because I feel like I didn't get a chance to really experience as much of the sort of music scene as I would have liked. I have a friend back there. His name is Schmeichel. His name is Michael, but we all call him Schmeichel. And he literally goes to shows like nonstop, and he's always constantly posting on Instagram that he's had his face melted by whatever new band. And I seriously, some of the craziest shit I've ever seen on his Instagram stories about some of these bands. But I searched for a while, and I will say it took a long time of wading through some seriously weird shit. But I did eventually find a band called In a Daydream that I liked quite a bit. And so to drop some info on them, they just released this album called This Side of Purgatory. December 3rd was when it was released, so brand new. It is a 7-track EP. I'm going to call it an EP because it's 7 tracks, and the first and last track are kind of like intros, and the last one's a coda. So it's really 5 songs. It's great stuff. I think they're a really cool band. It's a rock band, but it's they're calling themselves, let me see, how do they describe themselves? Detroit's most pretentious emo band. I don't know. I can't speak to all of Detroit's emo bands, but what I thought was really cool about them, I think, is that they do an interesting kind of a duality thing. They've got like this very clear kind of like Elliott Smith sort of thing going on, and then they pop into sort of the more pop punk emo Midwest style thing, like in a very kind of jarring way sometimes, right? Where you're sort of like, okay, we're really getting in deep. We're like, it's very depressing. It's very sad. There's all these kind of like anti-religious undertones that are super cool. And then like all of a sudden you'll just kick in with the drums, and it's kind of like poppy and in your face and pretty fun. They have the single that they released that's called I'm sorry, I had it up. It's called The Romantic Egotist. And this is like the perfect example of this. The first half of the song, very sad, super Elliott Smith vibes. They even got that like double chorused vocal thing going on that Elliott Smith did all the time. And then the drums kick in on just a nice snare tom fill kind of thing. And then suddenly it's big and it's happy and it's exciting. But it was very cool stuff. They even kind of open it with this sort of like classic church piano thing with an intro. that that's very neat. And like I said, kind of got this. Maybe it's religious or maybe it's anti-religious. It felt anti-religious to me, but that was really cool. And they're just doing cool stuff in the emo space. I sort of like this throwback feel that they've got going on, and the guitar tones are great, production's great, drums sound huge. Nothing stuck out at me as like, that kind of like indie band sort of vibe, in a bad way, at least. I mean, yeah, we may have to come up with maybe more of a formula for how we review these albums, because I'm just sort of rambling here, but I enjoyed the album. I think, if I had any criticism about it, I think I would say there were some moments where I thought the production went a little bit too far, and they did some things that felt like something a producer would sort of say, like, what if we did this? And it felt like it kind of took away from what the band was doing. But I think that's probably personal preference. It just, I tend to like when a band is just like open and raw, and there's a lot of that kind of going on, I think, with the feeling and sort of lyrics and vibe of the music. And there were moments where the production sort of jarred with that, at least in my head. But cool band, cool vibe. I definitely want to try to reach out and chat with them about, them making this record and putting it together. This is like a kind of format that we're really used to, right? Like, especially us as a band too, doing just the small EP and just like trying to put your best foot forward on a really tight selection of tracks. And so I'm curious to see how other bands do it. They've only got like, I think, a few thousand or a few hundred listeners. 550 monthly listeners, maybe 500 followers on Facebook. They're pretty small, but I definitely think we should change that. So if you find yourself looking for some good emo, go check out In a Daydream. We'll link them, I'm sure, in the YouTube description.
Of course you picked an emo band. Why wouldn't you pick an emo band?
Of course I did.
That's funny. No, that's cool though. That's good to hear, and it's good that the overall impressions of it were very mostly positive for the most part. Outside of the you had your little complaint about the production, but I mean, you're somebody that's so big into production at this point, and like you're good at analyzing where you feel there's too much or there's not enough or where it's kind of misplaced. So I could definitely see where that would be something that would stick out to you.
Yeah. I think it was mostly, there's this one track that the whole thing's kind of done in a radio edit vibe, and then they've got like they've got some chorusing and some phasing stuff going on, and it kind of just like put the whole thing in this weird like washy sort of thing. But I think with what they were going for, like, you could have just left it it was just a guitar and some vocals, right? And I think it probably would have gotten the same effect that they were going for without all of the extra effects, and it sort of just kind of, I don't know, just didn't gel with me quite the right way. And it sort of just felt like a wasted track. Like, if I was listening to the album again, I would probably skip that one and just move on to the other ones, because it's sort of this short little, acoustic-y style thing, but just with all these weird effects on it. So, again, personal preference. Some people love that kind of stuff. Just not my bag. But it's good to see that emo is alive and not just the rip off the nostalgic kind of way. You know what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. That's pretty interesting though, and it's pretty cool that you actually did find something that you ended up liking on your first try. That was one thing I was worried about when we had this idea, was what would happen if we commit to this and then we don't like it at all. Well, are we supposed to just come on and just bash strangers? Like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no. I spent a while trying to find something that I wouldn't, and I kind of had to go with like something, and maybe maybe this is how we end up talking about a formula. Is like, where do you stop? Like, I could have spent hours and hours and hours listening until I find something I absolutely loved and raved and about, but I think at a certain point you just have to commit, and I sort of just went like, what I need to listen to something that just isn't immediately offensive, to my ears. And so I'm curious, how did you decide?
Well, my first kind of fork in the road here was I looked for San Diego, and San Diego was not a searchable city. No, it is not. And that kind of makes sense. I live there, and it's not the beacon of music that a lot of people that don't live there might think it is. It's mainly Los Angeles, and then people come play in San Diego at some of the venues like Winston's or the House of Blues or stuff like that. But I decided then, well, where else am I going to go? New York City. just makes the most sense. And I figured I'd have so much to choose from there that it wouldn't be very difficult. So what I did was I looked at the most recent ones. I clicked on 2 before I got to the one I wanted. And, well, not the one I wanted, but the one that I settled on. And the first 2 were one I started to tell you about this. It was this guy who he wanted to be a cowboy, man. This guy wanted to be a cowboy, and he had a 23-minute song that was just him talking like a cowboy. There was not singing, and it was a thing. And then another one was like a 9-minute punk rock EP that had like 15 or 16 songs jammed into it. So it reminded me a lot of my youth and days of going to the real Warped Tour before it became the Walmart Warped Tour, basically. However, I clicked on the third one here, and it's by an artist named Samia. And it's not the band's name. It's actually, she's the artist named Samia. And I was interested for 2 reasons. The only reason I clicked it, the name of the album was Before the Baby. And now in my head, I'm thinking to myself, a woman's perspective of, writing and life maybe before having her first child. And I'm like, I would like to see how she, thinks about this and her perceptions of it, because I know how my wife feels about it. And obviously I have my own opinions on it. Well, I thought it would be an interesting subject matter. Now, little did I know, I didn't figure this out till well after I was done listening to it. That was not why it was named that. Her first major release was called The Baby. So, Classic, and because I didn't do my homework, I really went in totally blind here. So this is just showing you. I had no idea what I was doing here. But I click on the first track, and I hear the kind of guitar that I love. And it's a little bit of reverb, really not processed at all. Fender cleanish, maybe it was a Vox actually, and it was just like, I was like, okay, I can get into this. She comes in and a little bit of gain, like the indie rock style gain guitars come in, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, this is it. I'm like, this was easy. I'm just gonna listen to this. And she has a decent enough voice to it, and I'm like, this is good. I ended up really liking this record a lot, and I'm gonna tell you why. The first thing that stands out to me about this record, first of all, you hear a lot about how this person is, really bearing their soul, so to speak. And oftentimes it doesn't come across, even if they're doing it, if you're not really good as a writer, or great as a writer, I should say, it can often come out as a little bit trite, a little bit, like, it's like, maybe this is really deep, but you didn't word this like in a clever enough way, or like in a powerful enough way for me to really like be like, whoa, like that feels like something there. She is a great songwriter. She's a very strong singer. There's times where the band kind of reminds me of Gold Motel, which was a band I was really into. Also had a chick singer, and kind of more streamlined genre-wise. They were really into the same kind of sounds over and over and over again, which is great. But what I liked about this album was it's only 9 tracks. A few of them were like really empty. As far as like, it's what a lot of people would say is the typical like girl singer-songwriter thing that's going on, where she's being all emotional, and it's like kind of like, not the full band behind her, and it's a little bit slower, but the pacing of the album, it really worked with that. And there was 2 songs in a row that really, really, I was just like, this is fantastic. The first song is called Welcome to Eden. That song starts off with a modulated guitar that sounds really cool. It almost sounds like a chorus / univibe, like kind of thing to it. And I'm really into that kind of clean guitar. And just the cleverness, I'm not going to spoil it, but the cleverness of her writing, it hits you at one line and you're like, that was really smart. That was really smart. I love that song. Then right after that, and that's kind of a slower song, much more ambient with the guitar and then her singing. The next song that comes on after that, Ode to Artifice, is the band back. And I'm like, this is great. And my biggest takeaways from this album was, this is something I needed to hear, not just because I thought that this was a great band and she's a great artist, because technically, she goes by her name, not like the band's name or whatever, but there was such minimal production on this album. This felt like how I look at music. And this is kind of like the disconnect I have with modern music in the day where everything gets patched in. There's 40 different guitar tracks. This is something that there are little pieces of production in it. It's not like it's bare bones, and this is pro level job. Like, this was not done by some amateur as far as the engineer and the producer here, but it reminded me of why I love music. It was raw, it was real, and it felt like there was only like one time where she said something in the lyrics, and like she was literally like, she focused on her boobs for like 2 lines, but like in the context of the song it makes sense, but I'm like, oh man, you did that twice. But I mean, I'm really nitpicking here. I was just like, I'm like, whatever. But as a whole, like, I think she's such a good writer. She has such a strong voice, but she has that ability to kind of go like quirky. Like, there was like parts of Fiona Apple, but then also parts of Hayley Williams, and then her own vibe like really mixed into it. I was not expecting to find something that I liked as much as I did. And again, it was a well-needed kind of breath of fresh air. And considering that we're trailing towards the end of the tracking process for me and my wife's stuff, this is more of what I want. I don't want so much production. I don't know. I don't care for it.
Yep.
I don't care for it. I think it all has its place, but I don't know. For me and for this style of music, I think it was amazing. So great job, Samia. Great job.
Sure. What was the name of the band?
Samia. That's all it is. So it's just Samia.
It's weird. So on Spotify, she's there obviously, and she has almost 800,000 monthly listeners, so she's very big. But that album's not there.
That came out on December 3rd on Bandcamp.
Yeah, but it's not listed anywhere else, which is very strange. Yeah.
I never heard of her. Never heard anything, but I'm the old man with my head in the dirt saying, listen, I'm going to listen to my crazy Japanese metal / rock. I'm going to listen to Marty Friedman. I'm going to listen to Gary Moore and all the normal rock stuff that I listen to.
Sure.
I'm set in my ways.
I gotcha. No, I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? Is it was supposed to get us out of our comfort zone. I immediately went into my comfort zone and found an emo band, and you stepped out of it, and you were much more eloquent with your review than I am. So obviously, I have to step it up next week. But I think maybe we need to figure out what flavors we're going for in terms of reviews here. Or at least I do. But that's super cool. I'm definitely going to give it a listen. It's not in my wheelhouse, so I'm curious.
No, and it's one of those things where if I had heard by itself one of the empty tracks, well, not empty, but one of the tracks that doesn't have the full band, it was really slow, it's really emotional, I don't know that I would have listened to the rest of the album. I might have been turned off by that, just to the fact that it seems like it is what it is, and like I don't want to listen to a half hour of that.
It's tough too because Bandcamp is random, right? Whatever song it's playing on the album is random, so you very well could have gotten that and then been like nah and moved on. So
no, this started with the first song on the album. This actually played in chronological order, and I must say they did a great job picking that first song, because I was just like, oh, this is just all the right things. This is all the right things. It's got a little bit of that indie, a little bit of that garage rock to it. There's a few guitar solos in it, nothing too flashy, but very melodic and nothing too boring. And that's one thing that I find is a very underrated skill when you're playing in a more simple kind of act, as far as when you're voicing the guitars and stuff like that. A lot of the times what the guitarists will do is what the Paramore guy does and what we talked about. It's so basic, the lead lines. Like, you're following the lead motif here, right? And maybe you'll stretch for a note or here or there, but you don't actually hear, like, their kind of expression, their kind of take on the melody. And when there aren't many guitar solos on this record, but when there are, it does add something. It's not just repeating something, it's adding something. And I also appreciated that.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I know what you mean. As I've gotten older and we've kind of been toning down what we do, right, to sort of be more simpler. And I think this is what you talk about, like when you talk about a band who's doing lots of crazy stuff and then suddenly they maybe tone it down, and then everybody goes, oh, it just feels much more mature. And as a kid you're sort of like, oh, it just means they fucking sold out or whatever, right? Like they're just doing the radio. But I will say, like, the more that we've done this, the harder that stuff is to do well. So yes, there is an aspect of it where you're sort of going, okay, we're gonna chill out on this, and we're gonna hopefully reach more people that way, right? But to do that correctly is so much more difficult than I think any teenage guitarist gives any band credit for, right? Like everybody just thinks like, oh, they just don't do the hard stuff anymore or whatever. But it's a different skill, and it's one that is arguably more difficult than playing complicated, crazy shit, is doing simpler stuff your way and in an interesting way. So when you find a band that can do it well, it's definitely a cool thing to hear someone do it differently and uniquely.
I just find it so funny because when I looked on, I think it was Facebook, and it was like 4,000 fans, I was just like, oh, I found somebody nobody's ever heard of. Now, this just reinforces, I don't use Spotify. I don't like it. I don't like Spotify. So you're like, this has 800,000 monthly listeners, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what? Like, are you kidding me?
I think that's more of a credit or a discredit towards towards Facebook. That just nobody's on Facebook. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I hate Spotify as well, but they all suck. And mostly because I'm not an Apple user. I don't use Apple Music. But we were on YouTube Music for a little bit, and man, it was the fucking worst. No, YouTube Music's awful. Actually, I didn't mind Google Play when it was Google Play before, but we switched over to Spotify, and I really don't like it very much either. But it is a quick way for me to actually gauge who's listening to whose music.
All right, I just looked her up on Instagram, and she has 61,000 followers. So,
all right, so she's pushing it hard in Spotify and nowhere else. Because yeah, you're right. On Facebook, she's got.
I was making a cringe face because I was making a cringe face because I was like, oh, I thought I found something that nobody knew about, but a lot more people knew better than I thought. So, yeah, again, I'm old, man. I like what I like. So this is fun for me. I'm actually really glad that we decided to do it this way. And yeah, I would recommend this album if you're somebody that, you want to hear something really kind of raw, but produced well. Not raw in a sense of like it was recorded raw, but just like raw. Like it's cool, man. It's cool. She's really, really open. I'll give her that. She's not shy. Not a shy lady.
Well, now I'm definitely curious. Yeah. Well, yeah. I would definitely say to anybody who's listening, please let us know if you enjoyed this kind of, review on this sort of content as opposed to us just suggesting stuff to each other and eventually dwindling down our library. But I definitely had fun trying to find stuff, and I'm going to try to go a little bit more out of my comfort zone. I did actually start looking at genres that I was not comfortable with, and after a good 30 minutes of not finding something that was not kind of immediately a no, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put on rock in general, and I just happened to come across an emo band in rock. I wasn't looking for an emo band, but I think we're gonna try to keep jumping out of the comfort zone and try to recommend some new interesting stuff.
Okay, this week we're picking each other's locations. One stipulation and one stipulation only. That is.
Let me look real quick because they're limited.
Let me finish. I have it up. Okay.
Right.
It has to be one that you can pick, obviously, and da. Has to be in Europe. I'm going to give you Glasgow.
Okay. Let's see.
Or actually, just anywhere outside of the United States, because there might not be that much. Anything outside of the United States, give it to me.
Madrid.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's racist. You picked it knowing I can speak Spanish. That's messed up.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy. I'm happy to do it, and I love Madrid. I would love to go back. So, all right. So that'll be next week. So yeah, and we can find some. Just don't pick emo, dude. Pick anything else.
I didn't pick emo. I picked
yes, you
rock.
did.
Emo came up. It's not my fault.
You picked emo. You took the easy way out. Here I am.
I took the easy way out.
I took a record that I thought was going to be like similar to my wife's perspective of having life after a baby when it had nothing to do with that whatsoever. Happened to be after her first album name, but then I took a chance. Take a chance. Come on, you can do it.
All right. I'll take more of a chance, and then I'm going to come up with a much better review.
Yeah, well, your review is fine. The problem with your review is you can't go 5 minutes without shitting on something. So before you even got to the band, you're like, bandcamp. Before we start, I gotta tell you, your UI sucks. It's the worst I've ever seen.
Somebody fight me on it, right? If you don't agree that streaming services can do better, I'm willing to argue.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I just love it. It's so endearing how like spiteful and like little like nuanced hatred. Like you're not like a hateful person, but like the things that you get mad at that are silly, you get so mad. And I
do.
It always makes me laugh, and it reminds me of when we used to drink and we would go to the pool hall. And somebody would do something that would annoy you, and we would all see it. We obviously, I don't think you picked up on this because you were like 5 of those Yingling things deep. We would get those big pictures, and once we saw something annoyed you, we'd all just keep doing it until you were like, "I'm gonna go have a cigarette."
I've got an easy and open button. I get it. Yeah, whatever. I feel like if I'm taking it out on Spotify, I'm not taking it out on my family.
Jesus Christ, I hope you're not.
You know what I mean? Like, no, like I'm not yelling at anybody else. I'm just yelling at giant corporations that don't give a fuck what I think.
Fair enough. But just there will be a point you will yell at your kid. Just trust me on this one.
Oh yeah.
It will happen.
Of course.
And then you will question whether or not you're a bad father or not. It is totally normal. They are evil little things, but we love them.
Yeah.
Just giving you a heads up, because I know how you are with your anger. It will eventually manifest itself. You just have to try to control it a little bit. However, that's all the time we have for you guys today. I know that was an odd tangent at the end. I really hope you enjoyed that new segment, because I really did, and I had a lot of fun. Way more fun. I did not think I was going to have this much fun reviewing an album like that. That was very, very natural for me to do that. So hopefully next week we have something cool from Glasgow and from Madrid. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you got anything to say, Dave, now is your time, or forever hold your peace.
I do not. See you guys later.
Beautiful. I thought it was going to be one last rant. Take it easy, you guys.